Our scripture reading this morning is going to come from the book of Ruth. We're making a bit of a pivot this week. Instead of talking about time, the mess of time, we're going to talk about messy relationships. So we're going to do that this week by looking at healing relationships through the book of Ruth. Next week we'll explore toxic relationships, so that'll be a fun one as well. But let us prepare our hearts and our minds for God's word through Ruth. I'm going to read from chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, and then 8 through 21. And then I'm going to save the fourth chapter of Ruth for near the end of the sermon. So we'll pick up on that a little later on. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. At this time, Naomi gets word that the famine in Bethlehem has ended. And so she says to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," Naomi said, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived at Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me, and the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. So we're talking about healing relationships this morning. If I were to ask you to tell me about the healing relationships that you have in your life, I wonder how you would answer. I wonder how that question would be answered if we went out into the world and asked, where are your healing relationships in your life? My guess is that probably the answers in here would hopefully be a little bit different than the answers we get out there. But how would you answer that question? Unfortunately, I think a lot of times the words that we use actually don't reflect the reality of how we live our lives, we tend to focus more on the things, our possessions in life, rather than the relationships with people that heal. We misplace our desire for security and comfort and healing on the accumulation of things, of possessions. Think about this. The average size home that we inhabit today is about 3 times bigger than the average home that was built and lived in the 1950s. We have 3 times as much more space for our stuff, and yet there's a 2.2 billion square foot storage unit industry. We have all this extra room in our homes for our stuff, and yet we still need to take these possessions that we acquire through this pursuit of comfort and security. We need to put them all into storage. Shows up in technology as well. We talked about technology a little bit last week. You ever go out and buy a new phone or a new laptop or a computer? Apple's especially good at this. The way that they package their phones and their watches and their tablets, I mean, it is an experience to unwrap that clear cellophane from the box that is oh so neat and perfect. You slide the top of the box off, and it is matched with its counterpart so perfectly. And there's that beautiful gleaming phone just calling out to you. And then you get to peel back that protective cover off of the screen. I bought a laptop at the Apple store in Short Pond, and even though you're there with the salesperson, they're helping you to set it up, they have you do this activity because it gives you that sense of ownership, of possessing. It personalizes the experience. So there you are with your brand new phone. But if you drop it, it's a source of discouragement. And that doesn't just happen if you drop your phone. Think about this. These things are coming out usually every 6 months with a new and better version. The new iPhone 11, I believe, just came out in the last few days, or is coming out soon. So you go out and you buy this new technology because of all the bells and whistles, thinking this is going to bring me a sense of healing and fulfillment. But just 6 months later, there they go again, coming out with a newer and better version. And as soon as that happens, that thing that you thought was going to bring you fulfillment and joy now becomes a source of dissatisfaction because it's not the newest and greatest model. We see evidence of this in our shopping habits as well. Quite literally, your body changes when you go out and buy something that you have long wanted. Your brain will begin to release dopamine into your system, that thing that makes us feel good. But it doesn't last. The relationships we form with people are those things that can heal us. So we walk into kind of a mess this morning in the book of Ruth. We have Elimelech and his wife Naomi living in Bethlehem with their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. But there happens to be a famine in the land. And so this is the first sign of emptiness that we see. Now the irony is they're living in Bethlehem. The literal translation is house of food. Beit, house, lachem, food. So this man and his wife are living in this area called the house of food. And at the first sign of a famine, they leave. We talked about this a few weeks ago with Abraham and Sarah. Remember God calling them to the promised land, land flowing with milk and honey? And yet, at the first sign of a famine, they had barely settled down. They start to wander off to Egypt out of fear. So here we have Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 sons. They head off for the country of Moab because of this famine. Now, Moab is not just a region, it's a separate country. It's not part of Israel. In fact, the rulers of Moab often had conflicts with the Israelites. And so, again, there's another sign of emptiness in the lives of this family. And then there's death. Elimelech dies. Naomi's husband dies after they've come to Moab. Again, a sign of emptiness. But her 2 sons married to Moabite women. They are marrying foreign women. These people who are outside the chosen people of God. And so they get married, but then soon thereafter, about 10 years later, there's more death, more emptiness, as the 2 sons die. So Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, are left with their poverty and with their grief. They have lost their protection. They're living in a patriarchal society at the time. They've lost their protection from their husband and sons. They've lost their source of income, their very source of food. It's interesting to look at their response. Naomi decides she's going to go back to Bethlehem because the famine is over. How do Orpah and Ruth both respond initially? They say, yes, we will go back with you to your people. But as we'll see, our words, just like our stuff, are empty vessels if they aren't backed up by action. Nicole will tell you, I am a fixer. When there's something wrong, when there's a situation that evokes grief or sorrow, I'm a fixer. I'm guessing some of the guys out here share that same quality. I want to analyze the situation. I want to figure out what needs to be done, and then I want to tell you how we're going to do it. Because I want to fix the problem. And so I try to use my words. I really had to confront this during my chaplain internship a few years back at the VA hospital. Because there are many times when we're in these situations of despair and grief and sorrow where you cannot fix the situation. Nothing you say will fix the situation. And so you have to recognize that. One day our chaplain supervisor came into the area where the 4 chaplain interns, myself included, were working. And he gave us a challenge. He said, I want you to do an exercise with me. You can say yes or you can say no. But I want you to communicate your love to one another. I'm going to pair you up, 2 pairs, 2. You're going to sit across from your fellow chaplain intern. And you're going to communicate love and compassion with your eyes. Just your eyes. You cannot speak a word. And so there I sat across from Alex, my bearded seminary friend, and I agreed to do this exercise, but I kind of laughed when I found out what we were going to be doing, and I told him this is not going to go well. So we get in our chairs. Alex and I are sitting across from each other. My buddy Bruce and Tawn, the lone female in our cohort, were sitting across from each other. And we had to do it for 1 minute. Just stare lovingly into the eyes of the person in front of you. And for the person who's communicating the love, that's all you can focus on, is communicating with your eyes. But the other person has to assume a posture of receiving this love through their eyes. And then you're going to switch roles and you're going to do it in the reverse. And so there I sit, sweat pouring down my face. My hands were all clammy. It was uncomfortable. Because I had to sit there and stare into the eyes to do something. Not just use my words, but to look into the eyes of another human being and communicate love. Our words are empty vessels if they're not accompanied by action. Do you remember the second response of Orpah and Ruth? Naomi insists, no, you're not going to come with me. You should go back to your people. Go back to Moab, to your mothers. They respond differently. What does Orpah do? She weeps aloud, but then she kisses her mother-in-law on the cheek and goes back home. Ruth, however, responds differently. She says that oh so familiar line, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people, the people of Israel, will be my people. And your God, the God of Israel, will be my God. Our words are mere empty vessels if they're not accompanied by action. So Ruth and Naomi travel to Jerusalem. Do you notice what happens when they arrive? The women of the village run out to greet them. They're stirred up. And they say, can this be Naomi returning to our nation? What does Naomi say? Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because I am bitter. The Lord has gifted her, through Ruth, a faithful companion. The Lord has given her this gift of someone to walk with her in her time of grief and sorrow and bitterness. And so she says, call me Mara. Naomi means sweetness, but Mara means bitter. We look at this person, understandably grief-stricken, but she has more faith that the Lord will bless Ruth and Orpah, two Moabite women, two foreigners. She has more faith in that than she does that the Lord is with her. She thinks God is working against her. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, Ruth says. And your God will be my God. Do you remember how the story continues to unfold? Ruth and Naomi settle in back in the house of food, Bethlehem, this city. Ruth decides she's going to go out and begin to glean in the fields. Remember, their source of income, their source of food is gone now that their husband, father-in-law, and son/husband are all now dead. So Ruth goes out and begins to glean. This means she goes out into the field after it has been harvested, and she goes along and picks up the scraps that have been left over. Soon she meets the owner of this field named Boaz. And Boaz learns of her faithfulness, and he blesses her and invites Naomi to continue to work in his field, to glean in his field. Did I say Naomi? I remember. But here's the thing. When Ruth decides to do this, Naomi just says, go on and do it. She's still struck by her bitterness. She doesn't express any care or compassion for Ruth, that this single female is going out into the field to glean where she will be seen as prey. But Boaz sees her, and he says, you should only glean here because I will protect you. As the story continues to unfold, as you move deeper into Ruth, Naomi hatches a plan for them to get married. She tells Ruth to shower, put on very fresh, clean clothes, and to go in and lay down next to Boaz on the threshing floor. She says, uncover his feet, and he will tell you what to do next. You see, there's this thing in Israel called the kinsman redeemer, the guardian redeemer of the family. When one's husband or sons pass away, the kinsman redeemer, the guardian redeemer, is there to make sure they're still protected. But Boaz tells Ruth, there's a problem. I would take you in, but there's someone who is more closely related than me. So they engage in a deal. Boaz eventually marries Ruth, and they come together. And so we hear from Ruth chapter 4, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer, the child. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, Ruth, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child into her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Are you a Naomi this morning? Sweet and pleasant? Are you a Mara? Bitter about the circumstances and things going on in your life? Maybe understandably so. Are you a Ruth? Are you a faithful companion to someone? God's grace comes through people in surprising and unsuspected ways. So if you're a Mara this morning, keep your eyes open and look for the Ruths. They're all around you. God places these people in your life to be a faithful companion, to walk with you on this journey. And if you're a Ruth this morning, keep your eyes open for the Maras of this world. They're understandably grieved and bitter. They may even be thinking that they are afflicted by the Lord. But they have to watch for God's grace. And so a child is born in Bethlehem. God's grace comes to us in surprising and unexpected ways. A child is born in Bethlehem to Ruth. And it's placed in Naomi's arms. And the women come up to her and they say, Naomi has a son. A child was born in Bethlehem. Grace comes to us in unexpected ways. And Mara, who was so quick to talk about her bitterness, is stunned into silence. Lord Jesus, we give you thanks for your gift of grace. That grace that came to us so early on, even through Ruth, a foreigner, a foreign woman, whose grace came to Naomi. Lord, we are reminded that we too are Gentiles, that we have been folded into the chosen people, engrafted. And so we give you thanks for this early depiction of your grace being offered outside the people of Israel. Lord, as we reflect on your word to us this morning, God, we're reminded that we are given a choice to make. We can choose to return back to that familiar land of our people, or we can go out following you into places that are dark and sick and scary. Lord, you call us on these journeys to join up with people as a companion. God, I pray this morning that we will be strengthened and encouraged and inspired to be like Ruth, to be like Jesus.